All right. So thank you so much, Kelsey and Nikki, for this presentation. Coming up next, we have Dr. Gifty Asari with Alternative Care Practices to Aid in the Rehabilitation of Survivors of Gender-Based Violence and Brain Injury. And I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Sandy. And thank you as well, Kelsey and Nikki, who just presented before me. That was some great information. You've also made my work much easier in introducing the project. And so, I just wanted to say hi to everyone. I'm hoping this will be a little bit more interactive, so I will ask folks to, input I guess their contributions or whatever they'd like to share in the chat as I go along today. But first, I want to thank the Heartwork Conference organizers. So that's you, Sandy, Maya, Kelsey. I am honestly in awe of this conference. It's wonderful. To the collaborators and the speakers as well, I'm having an awesome time. And you've already inspired and taught me so much. So I've already incorporated some of my learnings into the presentation today. And honestly, again, this is just an honor all around. Thanks to the ED, of course, Nneka McGregor, as always. This organization and all of its impacts wouldn't be possible without you. Thank you to Sonia Boyce for coining the term heart work. Honestly, that's just bars on bars. So thank you. And thank you to the research team that I work with, especially Amy Kieftenberg and Jenna Fleming. They have been instrumental in the findings that I'm going to be sharing today, and they are the main contributors of the specific literature review. So today I'm actually going to do a more in-depth land acknowledgement towards the end of the presentation. And although I'm currently traveling, I reside in Montreal, Quebec, which is the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, of which the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is a part of, and the Anishinaabe people have strong historical ties to. But as mentioned before, I'll definitely take a longer time to really reflect on not only my relationship with the land, but with other folks' relationship with the land as well. All right. So I'm going to be talking about this research, and it's part of a 5-year Public Health Agency of Canada funded project that was just so very well introduced by Kelsey and Nikki. But the sub-portion of guests of research that I'll be sharing is part of this overarching project with the goal to develop, pilot, and evaluate an evidence-based trauma-informed multi-sectoral intervention or program, I should say, that's intended to improve health and well-being of women survivors of gender-based violence and traumatic brain injury. So the aim is to have some cross-disciplinary trainings, protocols for practice, policy recommendations, all of this for service delivery. And I'm going to talk about some of the literature review that we did before, I guess, really engaging in this program delivery. So there was an initial scoping review that explored how rehabilitation professionals, specifically occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech language pathologists, and physiatrists, were uniquely placed to offer specialized care to survivors. And after we shared kind of the findings of that scoping review, as initially mentioned and as shared, this is a survivor-led project. And so one way this manifests is through the involvement of WeSec, which again was just introduced by Nikki in great detail. So that's the Women at the Center Survivor Expert Collective. They are a collective of survivors with lived experience of brain injury. And they suggested a further exploration of other alternative care services such as music, writing, yoga, spiritual healing, pet therapy, and more that had potentially been of benefit. So naturally, honestly, when WeSec speaks, we listen, and it kind of boosted this literature review, this environmental scan of what current literature says about these care services. I do want to point out here that the word alternative, it just means other than the practices that we were initially exploring in the scoping review, but they're in no way lesser or secondary. So it is fully acknowledged that these care practices can be and are in many ways primary practices, with those offered by healthcare professionals sometimes being secondary or actually being the alternative, so to speak. So I'm sharing this diagram, which is a lot, but just wanted to shout out to WeSec. They shared this interactive diagram with the research team, and it is a lot of information, but I just kind of want to zoom in on the care practices for survivors of gender-based violence and brain injury. Here in circle, we kind of have what I want to draw our attention to. So on the far right side, we have the first pink box, and that's the primary healthcare provider, for example, neurologist, PTs, registered massage therapist. The second pink box, that would be the medical rehabilitation professionals that I mentioned. So those are the ones we looked at in the scoping review. And then we have the yellow-orange box, which is the gap that was identified. And so these are the alternative care practices, so to speak. And this is where we're going to have like the focus of our attention today. And I'm going to talk essentially about our research question, which is, well, what are the effects of alternative interventions on survivors of gender-based violence and traumatic brain injury? The key words that we use, I'll go into more detail later. Our search source was Google Scholar. We found out that it was actually duplicate or corroborative with the information that was being shown in PubMed. And we included research that involved folks that were 18 and above. They were survivors. So survivors included survivors of domestic violence, survivors of sex work and sex trafficking, and survivors of intimate partner violence or gender-based violence. And they had to be women or women identifying. And then, of course, they had to have an injury, a traumatic brain injury or brain injury in the literature. So all in all, we came up, or we found or identified 153 works. 93 were excluded. This is mainly because most of the works didn't have any mention of brain injury. Or they didn't have any mention of survivors in any of the categories that I just mentioned. And I also wanted to share that although 60 works were included and identified, we are about like halfway through this review. And so these are still preliminary results that I will be sharing, almost in kind of an anecdotal fashion. But we do, of course, hope to complete this review and share the findings very soon. All right. So talking about kind of the search model for this research. And so we had some intervention modalities to consider. So expressive arts, naturopathy, cultural, and community. We note that none of these categories are actually mutually exclusive per se, and they're not exhaustive in any shape, weight, or form. This is just what came out most in the recent literature that we looked at. So we kind of have a breakdown of these intervention modalities, the service providers as well, the survivor population, as I mentioned, as well as the injury. So naturally, I could honestly speak at length about any one of these categories. But again, this will be more of a preliminary overview. It's also a great opportunity to give folks a chance to interact with this material. So as I mentioned, as I go into these intervention modalities, feel free to share which of these care practices you might have engaged in or enjoyed. It's just as important to share which of these you've tried and didn't enjoy. Maybe it was a care practice that was really challenging, but it was helpful. Maybe it was a care practice that was hard work and it wasn't enjoyable or helpful at all. But I'm definitely interested in seeing what folks experience are with these different care practices. As I work on this project, I think a common and reoccurring reality is that the healing journey is just not the same for everyone. Um, it's most successful when it's individualized and tailored to each and every survivor. There is this African saying that essentially says all the fingers are not the same, but they each have an important function. And so I think in the same way, I think of all survivors are not the same and their journeys reflect this. But all survivors are equal in terms of just how important their own healing journey is to inform others. So I definitely want that to be kind of the overarching theme as we go through these care practices. All right, let us talk about expressive arts. See about, in general, the findings related to this. And so expressive arts here, we're talking painting, writing, we're talking movement, we're talking music. There's many other forms of expressive arts, of course, but again, just kind of doing a quick overview of some of those that came out through the literature. So the themes found in women's artwork depicting DB, were escape and harmony. Escape and harmony seem to be used to identify when folks' declarations contained a representation of how they became aware of the effect of DB and abuse upon their lives and how they started to move away from it. So often that artwork described maybe how the DB environment, often in the form of a new home, could be managed in a way that expressed a growing sense of self-determination. And in the natural environment, as a literal and metaphorical manifestation of escape and a desire, like a deep desire for harmony. There were also themes of relationships and social support, and that incorporated the ways in which women explored the nature and quality of their relationship with others, especially with their immediate family. How those relationships aided or maybe hindered their transition away from domestic violence and abuse. And then lastly, the theme of agency and resistance. That paid closer attention to the internal thought processes and narratives that women employed when presenting their lived experience about their transition away from domestic violence and abuse. And so there's this use of transitional stories to take into account the past, the present, and the future. And then there's also this use of art that gives shape to memory and imagination, and how the journey of domestic violence isn't linear in any shape, way, or form. It's also, when thinking of brain injuries, a wonderful way of using another modality to express what might not be accessible in another modality. So just to kind of make that clear and give an example, maybe after a brain injury, you are someone that writes a lot, you're someone that journals a lot, but that modality is no longer accessible to you as much because you're actually having difficulty remembering, you're having difficulty putting sentences together, putting your words together in a more or a cohesive way as you were used to. Then you might want to actually employ a different form of art, be it music or painting or drawing, that sort of thing. And so it is a great way to kind of move across modalities and express yourself in ways that are not necessarily accessible to you. So in terms of some of the findings, and maybe this won't necessarily be a shock to many, but there were some studies with regards to painting, and the evidence kind of showed some decrease in psychological trauma symptoms, severity, and anxiety, decrease in depression, and also some significant decrease in trauma symptom severity after art therapy intervention was combined with psychotherapy. So of course, there's a lot of research about art and the use of art in different situations, but specifically in gender-based violence and brain injury, there is still like a huge lack of research, I would say. But again, it is promising to see that the little research that there is, it is pointing towards it being healing overall for survivors. So now there's also the expressive art of movement. It could be someone's favorite, I'm not too sure. But incorporating the body into therapy as a way of healing is definitely important, but also can manifest its way in different ways. So some propose that trauma is stored in the body, and therefore the body should be the site of therapeutic work. This is actually widely accepted. If folks are open to this particular modality, there's Kundalini yoga, and that focuses on the mind and body, especially the nervous system. So during Kundalini yoga, there's chanting, there's practice of certain yoga poses, breathing exercises to elevate one's energy, all towards the crown. And it really uses movement, breathing techniques, and mantras to help individuals altogether. But research has specifically kind of shown how it helps individuals with PTSD. So during that specific study, they noted the importance of group interaction in the yoga classes and how that provided social support for the people with PTSD as well. Continuing in movement, there's Pilates, which is a gentle form of exercise, and stretching, which builds strength and flexibility. Now, I saw that, I think I read that research and I was like, oh, okay, this is great and this is wonderful. I might have been doing the wrong kind of Pilates for me, but this is not necessarily like reformer Pilates, which is a lot different because you've got like your arms shaking, your limbs are like flaying around. Essentially, you might think that the instructor has a personal vendetta against you, but they do promise that your butt will look good at the end. And while it does, and that's great and all for the purposes of pain reduction and increased mobility, tight buns is not the primary objective. So I do kind of want to shift here and talk about Pilates more as like the gentle form of exercise that's depicted in the picture there, really focusing on stretching, building strength and flexibility. And of course, you can then graduate it to the reformer version, which is honestly just as helpful, but you will feel the burn. But usually the motions are simple, they're gentle, they're controlled, they're safe. There's no bouncing per se, or aerobics, which can prove itself to be detrimental to some healing, especially for individuals that have a brain injury, especially like right after a brain injury. Rehabilitation is focused Pilates instructors. They support the quest for mobility and pain reduction, as well as pain re-education, which is often crucial to that healing process. So with regards to music, there's some research by Sandra Curtis, who is a feminist music theorist. And she talked in her research about how music improves mood and social interaction for individuals with moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. These are individuals as well that have been, that are survivors of gender-based violence. She also notes how music transcends demographics. I think that's something we can all agree on, and I could talk about it a little bit in detail. But there's a couple of quotes here, a quote that she mentions, which is, anyone who survived various relationship traumas by belting out Gloria Gaynor's 1978 hit, I Will Survive, Aretha Franklin, I Will Survive, will recognize the ethos behind feminist music therapy, designed to harness the power of music to heal and soothe the soul. And this is music with lyrics, which is one area. But there's also music without lyrics. There's also music that's just instrumental, music that's made with the body, but music also that's heard just throughout nature. So music can, of course, be evocative. It can help release emotions which may be suppressed. it can help transport someone towards a world of plenitude and well-being. In many countries, music, the beating of drums, percussion is synonymous with chanting, dancing. So we can begin to see how these care practices, they don't work in silos, but are interconnected. When you think about chanting and dancing, you now have music and movement working in collaboration, and that supports a system of regeneration. So sometimes just a melody is enough, sometimes just a beat is enough. But I think we can all kind of maybe recall an experience that we've had with a certain song, with a certain melody, with a certain beat, that just brings us joy, happiness, or even healing altogether. Um, as I mentioned during this conference already, I've learned so much, and I had already heard Natty Tremblay speak before. And before she had even begun her presentation, or before they had even begun their presentation, sorry, they introduced us to Jeremy Dutcher, a Two-Spirit Indigenous songwriter, singer-songwriter, and that exposed me to a different kind of music that I hadn't necessarily heard before, but that was honestly quite beautiful and emotive. And so I kind of recall that experience and also just that introduction. And I think that that is a way that all of us can kind of communicate. And that's how I see it transcending demographics, so to speak. We also have writing. Now, I don't even have much here with regards to writing because I feel like writing speaks for itself. But we're thinking here more of how instrumental writing can be in terms of journaling, note taking, and even learning fine motor skills. Research has definitely shown, specifically when it comes to brain injuries and healing, how these can be. Um, Almost like tools or methods to re-engage your brain, but also recall and remember things in an easier or more accessible fashion. So I've sustained a brain injury. It was a sports-related brain injury. I wouldn't say I wasn't already a note taker. I think I was more of a journaler, but I think note taking, the world of note taking took on a whole new other level after my brain injury. And so I think when I knew that I had to be more tactile, I'm not big on note taking necessarily on screens, but I like being able to write my notes on Post-its. I think Nikki does the same. Shout out to that. But it's a wonderful method. I use color-coded Post-its, for example, to help me with that. And so note taking is almost like it has its own art form, its own world, really. But it is all in kind of the expressive art of writing. Journaling for some has also been extremely helpful for people just to put down on paper, you know, or kind of organize on paper all that's going on in their minds and their heads and all that they've already experienced in the past. So I will delve into naturopathy now. And I'm going to start with acupuncture. Now, acupuncture, all of the other methods, I think, or all the other care practices that I just talked about, I can confidently say I've engaged in all of these. Acupuncture, I have not. I don't have a fear of needles. I know that some do. Sorry, I also just read the comments, which I shouldn't have done because someone said tight buns are important. Here. But going back to acupuncture, I don't have a fear of needles, but it's only through this research that I've really kind of been exposed to it and how helpful it might be. And so some of the research that reviewed showed that it helps reduce pain in brain injuries. It's also observed that it helps supply blood to the brain tissue and reduces pain with the help of muscle contractions. It can relieve anxiety, depression, and insomnia that often affect patients of traumatic brain injuries. Now, yesterday, I think the last talk, if I'm not mistaken, by Maria Montijo. I really hope I'm pronouncing that well, but I will learn. I'm sorry. So by Maria Montijo, she spoke of the back of a turtle. She was talking about Turtle Island and how it was honestly reflective of the actual animal. The back of a turtle has 13, I guess, like a 13 grids on the back, and that reflected 13 points of the body, engaging us with nature beyond just being a spectator, right? So really just linking us to the natural world. And then as I was going through this acupuncture research, they've been talking about 13 ghost points in traditional Chinese medicine. So in traditional Chinese medicine that also uses acupuncture, they have 13 ghost points divided into 4 quadrants and 1 extra point. And each of these quadrants representing a different stage of mental illness in that practice. And I just thought that was like a light bulb moment. But again, a lot of indigenous practices are really like linked to the natural world, but a lot of modern westernized practices are really drawing from that without even knowing it. Which again, every time those like connections are made, I'm like, ah. So acupuncture, I haven't tried it, but it seems to have been beneficial, at least according to some of the studies. And I'm really excited to see if anyone has had that experience as well. Moving on, we have nutrition. Food as medicine. In food, excellent medicine can be found. In food, bad medicine can be found. Good and bad are relative. Honestly, I don't even think there's much more to say about that. But research on food, research on herbal medicine is definitely extensive and exhaustive. Research on those with relation to brain injury, not so much. Research on those with relation to brain injury and intimate partner violence or gender-based violence, practically non-existent. But just kind of drawing from some of those ties, we know that foods can help build immunity, prevent inflammation, aid in digestive health, relieve stress and anxiety, improve sleep. We know the impact of food with relation to women's health specifically, aid in a lot of reproductional health. And so we're thinking here issues like endometriosis, cysts, PCOS. There's been some strong ties to gut health with relation to some of these issues. And then also just herbal medicine. And so like practices that are also indigenous that have maybe been lost in Western medicine can really show us the benefit of good food and of a good diet and good nutrition. That being said, there is like, I don't want to say the dark side, but the other side of this, where good food or food in general is not accessible to all. And I think that that is something that, like, it's worth mentioning that not everyone has access to food, and that there is a crisis in that sense when it comes to access to nutrition and a good diet. And so it's almost like a privileged. It is a privilege, honestly, to have that kind of access and to be able to utilize that for healing. Sleep. This is my own crutch. I am notoriously bad at sleep, but poor sleep is both common for symptoms of TBI and of GBV separately. So put that together, and it seems like a lost cause. But there is a lot of research or there is some research to kind of tell us the effects of poor sleep and what it does to one's body. How we get to good sleep, though, is almost always lacking or tied to all of the other care practices that I'm going to mention, and is its own web of difficulty, if you will. But there is a wide breadth of research that has shown that across most life stages, women sleep more than men. recently, I think there was a finding that was shared across a lot of like social media platforms that the study with regards to sleep that said, we need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, or the average of 8 hours of sleep a night, was a study that was done on 400 men, no women. And so other studies have tried to replicate those findings and essentially found that women actually need about 9 to 10 hours of sleep, so a little bit more. And other research has corroborated this to say on average, women need about 30 minutes or more of sleep a night compared to men. So there is like a need for longer sleep, but also better quality sleep. We know that this is impacted by BI and GBV. So that research is all corroborated, but as I mentioned, there is a gap of how we can improve sleep. But some of the contributions with regards to poor sleep include diet. And so, for example, iron deficiency is relatively low in women, and estrogen that's high oscillating and fluctuating across a 28-day cycle explains why we would need longer sleep and better quality sleep. And so it seems that if we're able to actually regulate those two things, we already have a good basis. My favorite, I guess, topic, or I guess subsection that came through this research was pet therapy. I am a huge dog lover. Have I ever owned a dog? No. But it is my dream to finally own one very soon. And I've babysat more than my fair share. But the human-animal bond has been credited with reducing depression, loneliness, while increasing a sense of self-worth, empathy, psychological well-being, and a sense of purpose. And it's been shown in some of this research by Mims and Waddell in 2016 that the most essential and advantageous benefit of animal-assisted therapy over other forms of therapeutic modalities was the effect of reciprocity. So in animal-assisted therapy, an animal can provide a person with a chance to give love and affection as well as receive it. And that is, like, it seems very simplistic, but when I really like sat down with that and thought about it, I was like, that is everything, especially for someone that has survived gender-based violence, to not only give love and affection, but to also experience the receipt of love and affection, does truly provide a direction and a pathway for recovery and for healing. And so I think this little bit of research related to pet therapy, to animal-assisted therapy, was honestly very eye-opening for me, and is definitely worth exploring. So if anyone has pets, feel free to put that in the chat if you agree that pet therapy or the comfort of your pet has brought you joy, healing, or recovery. So in their research, they kind of shared the benefits that they actually measured. And so they saw increased communication amongst the survivors. They saw increased mood and morale, enhanced physical skills, because again, depending on the pet that you have, you might be, I don't want to say forced, but encouraged to go outside, take a walk, run, that sort of thing. There's increased motivation, improved social skills, less pain, lower blood pressure, less stress and anxiety, as well as just better behavior altogether. So some of the benefits of pet therapy. Okay, and so now as I kind of gear towards the end of this presentation, I wanted to talk about cultural and spiritual healing as a form of care. So this is utilized in African and Indigenous communities, but in many others as well. But again, just thinking about the specific research, it incorporates teaching from elders and First Nation communities, commitment and acceptance therapy, as well as incorporating cultural elements and natural world elements as well. And I have a link there that kind of points us to the First Nations Health Authority. On that website, anyways, there's a PDF as well that kind of explains and explores traditional wellness being central, improving, transforming First Nations health in BC through the guidance of traditional healers, as well as through shared goals of communities and the First Nations health governing bodies. Traditional wellness is an important part of a healthier future, and they've essentially established and firmed a way for them to do so, using traditional healing health practices, approaches, knowledge, beliefs, sometimes in collaboration with Western techniques and sometimes not at all. So those practices include using ceremonies, plant, animal, or mineral-based medicines, energetic therapies, physical and or hands-on techniques. All right. So in a work by Audrin in 2022, he mentioned the importance of traditional teachings, dreams, visions, and ceremonies, describing how smudging, prayers, sweats, and circles help them heal from their partner's abusive behaviors and go further in their healing journeys. To note that shelters on reserves must also consider how chief and council views the shelters themselves. So shelters that don't have a good relationship with the chiefs and councils experience difficulties. But incorporating that aspect into the healing journey has definitely been influential and beneficial, as noted by this specific study. In some of the research, Black women spoke of their religious faith as an important resource that assisted in coping with intimate partner violence abuse. So women of African ethnicities most often seek out solace inside their communities, enabling them to maintain deep ties to their religious belief, which enhance their social relationship. Spiritual abuse is a serious type of intimate partner violence that has received little recognition, but in this form of abuse, abusive partners would not allow the practice of spiritual views or participating in organized religion. And so that is also a barrier that has been noted and brought to light in this research, but also in this project by looking at these care practices. So I would like to share a quote from Becoming Kin, a book that was shared with Women at the Center workers. I think Nikki read a quote from it in the beginning, and there is a quote that I think really expanded on this specific care practice as I was reading this book and doing this research. So Miles, an African-American historian, said that there are gaps in Black studies where Native should be and gaps in Native studies where Black should be. We are not discrete categories of people upon which colonialism acts in different ways. We are a Venn diagram with areas of huge overlap. And I definitely see that the more I looked at these Indigenous care practices and kind of delve into anti-colonial practices as well, the Venn diagram of Indigenous folks and Black folks' experience is really being united in some aspects. So another quote on this page, I think really reflects that as well, taken from the same book. It says, "But the land is alive, and perhaps the land that exists in the place we call Africa carried stories of ancestors to its western shore. Maybe the stories traveled on mycelium networks that stretch for miles underground. Maybe the trees whispered to each other. Maybe the memories and knowledge were carried on dust that blows from the Sahara to the Atlantic. Perhaps the sea, a primeval creature of long memory, accepted the burden of these stories and bore them on waves, gathering them along with the heartbeat and tears of those who did not complete the crossing. In this way, stories wash up on the shore of the land we call North America and are carried inland. These stories are shared in low murmurings, in the whispers of wind and trees and grassland, so that the beings who live here and listen carefully to such stories are able to offer medicine and belonging to those in the diaspora. So, as I come to an end of this presentation, really sharing some of the findings with regards to the literature, but really sharing why and how these care practices can be utilized in a healing journey, I definitely want us all to kind of reflect on the quotes from that book, but also recognize that. Their declarations and experiences, while impactful and central to receiving funding, is instrumental and cannot be belittled. But of course, we have funding agencies that call us out with requirements to kind of center numbers, statistics, percentages, and sometimes only academic references. But it is important to note that organizations, Women at the Center, and others that might be listening today have a voice here and a great opportunity to redirect that narrative and center voices, declarations, experiences, and life altogether. And I think that's what heart work means to me. This is definitely new for me to present research in this way, but I've found it liberating in a sense, but also important and crucial to sharing what the impact of research is, what the outcomes of our research is. And so I think that when I think heart work, when I think about healing, when I think about restoration, rehabilitation, transformative justice, this is what heart work is to me. And I feel like I would be remiss also if I didn't mention that I should and can also speak to how inaccessible some of these care practices might be for some, compared to others. And so none of these care practices are one size fits all, and none of these are available or accessible to all. But people do need to be given the opportunity to like go into the dressing room, so to speak, and try different things on. So you don't have to be an avid shopper like myself to enjoy like finding the perfect fit. Sometimes you just like find a wonderful dress and a wonderful outfit. And you put that on, you turn yourself around and look at yourself in the mirror, and you're just like, yes, like I look good. Like this fits perfectly. I've never looked more snatched in my life. And I kind of think of these care practices in that way, where people have the opportunity to try different ones on. And then when they find one that fits well with them, they're like, yes, like this is what I needed. This is what is helping me reclaim independence, reclaim power, reclaim self altogether. So I do hope, this kind of literature helps do that, helps expose the different care practices to others and help folks kind of decide to try a different one on. Like for myself, I was like, maybe I might give acupuncture a try and see if that works for me. But all in all, from yesterday, I gathered a lot. And another thing I gathered was this quote where it's not information, it's how to experience. So we have to learn how to become alive again by Maria Montejo. So with that, thank you so much. I've left a little bit of time for questions, or a little bit of time to read the chat and see what folks are saying. But yes, thank you all for coming today and sharing as well. I love it. I think I might have a little bit of time to read this. I see here my cat is literally my therapist. Wonderful. I love that. I know I see here as well. I'm our dog's favorite human because I get and give him all the love. I was really not a pet person before he joined our family, but I can feel my stress melting, snuggling him. I love that. That's wonderful. I'm really excited by this dog, this pet owner experience. Thank you, folks, for the support. I love that. Another one said, for many summers, I worked in tobacco harvest with a number of Indigenous women. Many injuries and medical problems were resolved by these women. Indeed, through their knowledge in traditional medicine from roots and plants. Yes. That definitely is, I think, like the natural world relationship as well as medicine in terms of herbal medicine, eating well, but it also involves movement, like the action of planting and harvesting, which is nice. It also involves music for some, just listening to the earth, whether it be like rivers, water, rainfall. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. And I think we have a little bit of time for a break, but I will go ahead and pass it on to Sandy.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Gifty, for this amazing presentation. And yes, we'll be taking a short break and we'll be back at 2:30.